You stand at a gas station register on a Tuesday afternoon. You grab a bottle of water from the glass cooler. The shelf tag says $1.99. You tap your card against the terminal. The chime rings, and the receipt printed on the screen reads $2.47. You didn't buy anything else. No gum, no magazine, no extra items. Yet somewhere in the 3 seconds between deciding to purchase that water and the payment clearing, 48 cents materialized out of thin air. That is a 24% instant markup on a basic bottle of water. Now run that exact math across every coffee, every utility bill, every grocery trip, and every monthly subscription in your life. This is not a story about inflation. Inflation is straightforward. Money enters circulation, supply chains stall, currency loses purchasing power, and numbers on tags move upward. We understand that arithmetic. What is happening right now across the American economy is something fundamentally different, far more deliberate and carefully engineered. The price you see on the tag and the price you actually hand over at the end of the transaction have quietly split into two completely separate numbers. And the gap between those two numbers is widening faster every single year. Look at a single scene playing out in a pharmacy line in suburban Minnesota. A woman stands holding a box of children's allergy medication and a bottle of vitamin D recommended by her doctor. The total at the register comes to $43. She does not pull out a credit card or hand over cash. She opens a Buy Now, Pay Later app on her phone and splits that $43 purchase into 4 installment payments over 6 weeks. She is not financing a high-end smartphone or a luxury vacation. She is financing basic, over-the-counter vitamins because $43 at once is more than her weekly household budget can absorb without breaking. Now look at the opposite side of that exact same economic ledger. In the first quarter of 2026, the United States Bureau of Economic Analysis released its latest financial report. Corporate profits in the United States hit $4.4 trillion. That is the highest single-quarter corporate profit total ever recorded in American history. Let those two facts exist side by side for a moment. Families are taking out 4-part microloans to buy allergy medicine, while the corporations selling those products are pulling in record-shattering trillions in net profits. That is not a political argument or an ideological statement. It is the cold, objective arithmetic of the American economy right now. And understanding how both of those statements are simultaneously true is the central core of this investigation. To see how we reach this point, you have to look at the consumer environment where most people first felt the ground shift. The grocery store. Walk down any supermarket aisle today, and you are walking through a carefully constructed laboratory of behavioral psychology. Take a jar of peanut butter you have purchased for years. Same brand, same red lid, same shelf location. For a decade, it held 16 ounces. But recently, the base of that plastic jar quietly changed. It curves inward just a fraction of an inch deeper than it used to. The package height is unchanged. The label width is identical. But the jar now holds 14.5 ounces. The shelf price went up 8%, while the actual contents inside dropped by nearly 10%. The United States Government Accountability Office formally analyzed this trend and confirmed what millions suspected. Shrinkflation has become standard practice across packaged goods. It works because human visual architecture prioritizes height and width over depth and mass. We notice when a box gets shorter. We do not notice when a container retains its profile while losing 15 grams of interior volume. When consumers eventually caught on and began reading net weight labels, corporate boardrooms simply adapted to a second, more invisible tactic: skimpflation. They kept the container size identical, they kept the weight reading the same, but inside the recipe, high-grade ingredients were systematically replaced with cheap alternatives. Pure fruit juice was swapped for water and concentrate blends. Butter was swapped for palm oil derivatives. Quality proteins were subbed out for processed fillers. You are no longer getting less product for more money. You are getting an entirely different, cheaper product, disguised in the same branded packaging you spent decades learning to trust. What we are witnessing is the structured breakdown of the fundamental market contract. The advertised price used to be a firm agreement. Today, it is merely an opening anchor in a system designed to extract maximum yield from every single transaction. From mandatory checkout surcharges to algorithmic pricing models, The mechanics of this system were built to ensure you pay more before you even realize the rules have changed. To understand how the American consumer economy transformed into a high-friction extraction engine, one must examine the fundamental shift in corporate revenue strategy that occurred over the last 2 decades. For much of the 20th century, consumer goods corporations expanded earnings through volume expansion. The macroeconomic paradigm was straightforward. Manufacturers sold higher quantities of physical units to a growing domestic population. Companies built profitability by expanding production lines, optimizing supply chains, and acquiring market share. By the mid-2000s, however, that model encountered a hard structural wall. Market saturation reached critical levels across almost every major consumer sector. The average domestic consumer could not physically consume more packaged food, lease more passenger vehicles, or subscribe to additional media services. Physical unit sales plateaued. In standard economic conditions, plateaued unit sales lead to stable, flat earnings growth. However, Wall Street equity markets do not reward flat earnings. Publicly traded companies operate under relentless quarterly pressure from institutional investors, private equity firms, and activist hedge funds to deliver compounding margin growth regardless of broader economic conditions. Facing a ceiling on physical volume growth, corporate executive boards abandoned volume-based strategies and pivoted toward yield optimization. If corporations could not sell more units to more people, they would systematically extract higher net revenue per transaction from the existing customer base. This structural pivot laid the groundwork for the modern fee architecture. What began as occasional administrative charges rapidly evolved into systemic, hidden cost structures across every major sector of the US economy. Consider the housing market, where the gap between advertised costs and actual total expenditure has reached historic proportions. In traditional real estate operations, base rent covered the core utility and access rights of a residential lease. Over the past decade, institutional property management corporations, backed by consolidated real estate investment trusts, began unbundling standard housing services into mandatory line-item fees. In 2024 and 2025, consumer protection filings revealed a standardized pattern across multifamily housing developments in dozens of states. Prospective tenants were quoted base rental rates on public marketing platforms. After submitting non-refundable application fees ranging from $50 to $100 per adult, tenants received lease agreements featuring mandatory monthly additions, technology access fees, mandatory trash valet charges, utility processing administrative fees, and digital payment portal fees. The Federal Trade Commission documented instances where advertised monthly rents of $1,700 resulted in final monthly obligations exceeding $1,900. Because applicants had already surrendered non-refundable application funds and invested time in the application process, the psychological and financial friction of restarting a housing search forced the vast majority of renters to sign the inflated agreements. A similar evolution occurred within the hospitality and restaurant sectors. Following the supply chain disruptions and labor market shifts of 2021 and 2022, dining establishments introduced temporary operational surcharges. What were initially framed as temporary measures to offset rising wholesale food costs quickly became permanent revenue line items. By 2025, point-of-sale software platforms had fully integrated automated surcharge algorithms into standard restaurant checkout hardware. Diners across major metropolitan areas routinely encountered mandatory kitchen operational fees, card processing surcharges, and pre-selected tip options calibrated at higher baseline percentages. The software interfaces were deliberately designed using choice architecture principles, placing lower tip options or opt-out buttons behind secondary navigation screens. By altering the digital interface at the point of purchase, payment processors and merchants leveraged social friction to secure higher final transaction totals. The auto industry represents another critical case study in this geographic and economic trap. Modern passenger vehicles are built with integrated hardware that is digitally restricted by internal software systems. Automotive manufacturers realize that selling a vehicle as a single, one-time capital transaction limited long-term customer monetization. In response, auto manufacturers implemented recurring subscription models for physical features already installed in the vehicle, such as remote engine start, heated seating, and enhanced battery capacity. A consumer who purchased a $40,000 automobile found that maintaining access to built-in mechanical capabilities required recurring monthly payments. If the owner cancelled the subscription, the manufacturer remotely disabled the feature via over-the-air cellular updates. This shifted the fundamental concept of consumer ownership toward a permanent, non-negotiable lease model. The systematic expansion of these practices across housing, transportation, healthcare, and daily retail generated record corporate profits, while consumer debt reached unprecedented levels. As base wages failed to keep pace with the combined impact of headline inflation and hidden transaction fees, household balance sheets strained. Credit card debt crossed national records, driven not by luxury discretionary spending, but by routine purchases of household necessities, medical care, and basic utilities. The historical trajectory shows a clear pattern. Market saturation led to corporate strategy shifts. Strategy shifts led to interface manipulation and fee unbundling, and unbundling permanently altered the true cost of living in the modern economy. The systemic expansion of non-transparent pricing architectures has precipitated a direct confrontation between regulatory enforcement bodies, state attorneys general, and institutional corporate sectors. The institutional mechanisms governing modern pricing are no longer defined by simple supply and demand equilibrium. Instead, they rely on complex administrative algorithms, unbundled billing structures, and deliberate informational asymmetry designed to maximize revenue collection at the point of sale. A primary flashpoint in this operational conflict centers on the healthcare sector, where the practice of diagnostic upcoding and facility fee unbundling has reached unprecedented financial scale. In January 2026, the United States Department of Justice announced that healthcare-related False Claims Act enforcement actions yielded a record $5.7 billion in settlements and judgments for fiscal year 2025. This total represented more than triple the enforcement recoveries recorded in 2024, driven primarily by systematic misrepresentation of patient severity and billing codes across major hospital networks and managed care organizations. Healthcare Dive. The mechanical framework of upcoding relies on proprietary billing software integrated directly into electronic health record systems. When a patient presents at an emergency department or urgent care facility for routine clinical evaluation, the software automatically cross-references the documentation with higher reimbursement billing categories. A basic clinical evaluation requiring minimal intervention is frequently categorized under evaluation and management billing codes intended for complex multi-system illness. In addition to diagnostic upcoding, hospital conglomerates have expanded the imposition of mandatory facility fees. When health systems acquire independent physician practices, the physical location is reclassified as a hospital outpatient department. Under this administrative reclassification, patients receive identical care in the exact same office location from the same medical staff, but receive two separate invoices, one for professional physician services and a second, non-negotiable facility fee intended to cover hospital overhead. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau noted that these mandatory facility fees frequently range from several hundred to several $1,000s per visit, appearing on patient statements weeks after the service has been rendered without prior cost disclosure. Simultaneously, the regulatory response from federal oversight bodies has triggered intense litigation across corporate sectors. On May 12, 2025, the Federal Trade Commission's Trade Regulation Rule on Unfair or Deceptive Fees, codified under 16 CFR Part 464, formally took effect. The federal rules specifically targeted bait-and-switch pricing strategies and non-transparent fee structures, establishing civil penalties of up to $51,744 per violation. Barnes and Thornburg. The promulgation of the rules sparked immediate opposition from industry trade associations, which argued in federal court filings that the Commission exceeded its statutory authority under Section 5 of the FTC Act. Despite ongoing legal challenges, the FTC expanded its enforcement perimeter. On March 13, 2026, the Commission issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking specifically targeting unfair and deceptive rental housing fee practices, aiming to prohibit mandatory administrative, technology, and amenity fees that are withheld from initial advertised rental rates.
Eimer Stahl LLP.
In parallel with federal initiatives, individual state legislatures have enacted aggressive statutory remedies to close regulatory gaps. California, Colorado, Minnesota, Massachusetts, and Virginia passed comprehensive transparency statutes enforcing all-inclusive price display requirements across commercial transactions. Under the California Consumers Legal Remedies Act amendments, businesses are legally prohibited from displaying, advertising, or offering a base price that fails to include all mandatory fees or charges up front. Eimer Stahl LLP. However, corporate entities have adapted to state-level statutory restrictions by implementing dynamic pricing algorithms and secondary processing surcharges. In the retail and food service industries, major enterprise merchants have deployed electronic shelf tags connected to central pricing servers. These dynamic pricing platforms allow corporations to adjust retail prices in real time based on foot traffic, inventory levels, competitor pricing, and local demand metrics. While dynamic pricing is legally distinct from hidden fees, consumer advocacy groups argue that real-time price fluctuation undermines price comparison capabilities and systematically increases final consumer expenditure. Furthermore, credit card interchange processing surcharges have been shifted directly onto consumers. When merchants incur payment processing fees from financial networks, these costs are automatically calculated and added to the terminal balance prior to transaction completion. The structural gridlock created by these competing forces has left the consumer market in an adversarial state. Corporate finance departments continue to design automated revenue extraction tools that operate within legal ambiguities, while regulatory agencies rely on retrospective enforcement actions that often take years to resolve in federal court. As a result, the financial burden of these unbundled pricing systems remains actively integrated into the daily cost of living across the nation.